All right, well, welcome back for part 2 of the market revolution. Let's take a look a little bit more into those outcomes, those problems, those opportunities, and see what we can find. Let's get going. So as we said before, we're looking at suppliers, producers, and marketers, and what they're looking for. And the biggest, like the bottom line I'm thinking is that they really wanted to protect and preserve their own self-interest. Each of those little wants and desires, whether it's building factories and dealing with labor and the problem with smog and the safety and trying to build up more machines, whether it was a problem with suppliers and now all of a sudden slavery is starting to look more profitable again. And so where do I get slaves? I'm not supposed to import them anymore. What about marketing? And you have to find new markets. You got to get deeper into the different countries and regions, and sometimes there's a little pushback. They don't want my presence there. They don't want my products. They don't want what I got to sell. So they might push back. How do I deal with that? That's what's coming up this time. The idea, again, as I said, was Britain is sort of like the powerhouse. They're the main leader, and so they're sort of setting the pace, setting the tone of, well, what do we do in this new age? And with all these new abilities, where do we go from here? How do we use this power? Well, let's look at some of the things that are sort of flowing out of this revolution. We have new commodities. We don't have just the traditional artisan who's sitting in a village somewhere or in a small town and they're making things and weaving things by hand or pottery and stuff. Now we have machines that are able to do more variety of things, make more applications of things, utilize more things. We have coal coming in to heat, to fuel. We have steam engines, steamboats. I mean, there's a lot of stuff happening that is beyond what was, say, 50 years earlier. We have newer and bigger markets. We have, of course, as I said, a labor demand. We need it on every aspect, every leg of the supply chain has to come up. This also means that there's an investment into public improvement, better roads, housing, cities have to be built. People have to be hired to do those sorts of things. Their civil works needs to be done. Sewage, highways, or if you're going to call highways, major roadways, all of this, bridges, these things all have to be taken care of. And that also means that there's an expansion of finance. If I have the opportunity to delve into part of this market revolution, into some of this industrial revolution and this technological sort of advancement, there's going to be people who are going to need money and who will want to lend money. And so now we have this more rapid exchange of monies between peoples. I can now make a living out of lending money now. Banks are going to rise up. Lenders, private lenders are going to rise up. Those are all parts of this marketing revolution. But there's also cultural changes that are going to take place. Because many of the Industrial Revolution developments, advancements, because of their own application of it into the market revolution and they're making money, they are, I don't want to say they're arrogant, but there's a sort of European pride that is rising up. They have captured the keys to the knowledge of God's laws, how the universe works. And there is a certain kind of superiority that is coming out of this era within that Western European region. They are going to see themselves as being boundless. There's nothing that they can't figure out, so to speak. And that's going to play also into the later part of this time period, 1830s to 1870s-ish. As England becomes the primary producer, manufacturer of clothes and goods and start sending them out to the rest of the world, what we see is a standardization of fashion throughout the world. Men are wearing pants, ladies are wearing dresses or skirts, and they look very similar to the ones that are being advertised in like British magazines, French magazines. There is there is this setting of a trend, a standardization of dress and what that consists of. There's also a new missionary zeal. Again, they have that sense of we hold the keys of the knowledge of God's laws. We've had the Bible translated now into multiple languages, and particularly from London, the London Missionary Society, there is this big evangelical push to take the Christian doctrine, Christian teaching to all of the uttermost parts of the world, following these trades and these market paths. Dr. David Livingstone is one of the most famous. He goes to Africa and he evangelizes there. Very big missionaries, which sort of makes sense, right? Because if you're dealing with the aftermath of the democratic revolution and all that it is wrapped up in, because much of it is wrapped up in the idea of it being rooted in the knowledge of God, the Christian God, it just sort of makes sense that now you're going to have these missionaries that are going to try to spread this out throughout the rest of the world. There's also a growing middle class. Queen Victoria sits on the throne in all of her staunch properness. It's the Victorian age. And she is the symbol of stability and family, motherhood, and things of that sort. And so there's this growing, as people are getting more and more income, more and more people have access to that income. There is this middle class. They're not the poor people anymore. They're not the richy rich, but they're making a good, really good, comfortable living. And that becomes a new market. Other things is the development of specialized working class. These are factory workers for the most part. They're not the farmers way out in the boonies. This is a sort of a new class of working class, really centered in cities. The picture on the bottom is kind of a sort of a neighborhood in one of these factory cities. You see how all the houses are very, very narrow, very close and jammed together. There is a sense of the different kinds of workers in the picture with the factory there. I don't know if you are familiar or have read yet David Copperfield by Charles Dickens. This is a kid, the story of a kid who's sort of been raised up in England. He kind of comes from poor, lower class, works his way up through the working class, and ends up working his way up the social ladder. If you haven't read it, I highly recommend it to everyone. If your thing is not reading, you can always watch the movie. But this working class, they're the ones who are the cheapest laborers. They don't make a whole lot of money. They don't really live in the best of environments. They are now competition for slaves. So the slave, if the owner of the factory or whatever uses them, or owner of the plantation uses them, that is sort of like free labor. And the person, the owner, doesn't have to pay for a working class person to work there. So the working class see the slaves as kind of competitors. And there's a downward look. There's long working hours, it's low pay, and the environment is absolutely horrendous during this time. Another one is this debate over slavery. I mentioned this a little bit in our last video. This map here is a map of that southern part of the United States at this time, around the 1850s or so. Anything that's in the green is an area of cotton production. Those areas that are in the stripe purple contain about, the population of that area is about 50 to 75% slaves. And then the dark purple, it's anything above, it's actually over 75% make up that region. Missionaries oppose this. As a matter of fact, some of the greatest abolitionists to slavery really had their start in Christian faith. And they took that faith and applied it to the slaves in America, also in Europe, and worked really hard to do it. Suppliers, though, the growers, they're going to be opposed to it because it's a good way to make a lot of profit. As I said in the last video, 2/3 of cotton used in England at this time is actually coming from this little part of the United States at this time. There is large-scale migration also. People are moving to where jobs are. They're moving to where the opportunities are. And so here's a map of this time. This is between 1500 and 1950. However, the majority of the moves, the majority of the migrations in every aspect, every part of this map is in this time frame in the early 1800s to about 1870, 1880. So if you look at the biggest, fattest migration, 32 million coming out of Western Europe going into the United States. That has a huge influx. We start with Europe and France and things like that, and eventually you have Ireland, you have people from Ireland, you have Germans who come across. There are still regions in the United States that have some of the largest, densest populations of Germans or Irish within that circle, just because of this migration. Russia had a migration as it's developing. By the time you get to the 1900s, 1914s, you end up with about 10 million Russians going from Western Russia, moving across the Siberian terrain, moving into further east. India is controlled by England right now. You see all the different routes, all the different swishes as it moves. And the reason for this is because Indians, the population here, is actually joining in, becoming part of, they're assimilating with the British government. They're becoming the British police, the British soldiers, the people that come into Eastern Africa and control things and guide things, guard things there. South Africa, coming across into the Caribbean. That's another one. But another huge one, another big one, is coming out of China. This is coming down into Southeast Asia. They're seeing this as opportunity. There's just a lot of spice growth, a lot of market is going on here, and those that were leaning towards that kind of a life, they ended up moving a lot. This says, what, 22 million people during this time frame came into into those regions. And there's still a major demographic on these islands, on these little parts of the world. Just another example is Australia. In 1830, the dark brown is on the very tips. That's where the British had settled. And that was about it. But by the time you get between 1830 and 1875, look at how much more. That's all the kind of tannish brown. Look how much bigger it is. And see those red lines? Those are railroad lines. So what are the British doing in Australia? What's the benefit there? Well, they're growing cattle. They're raising cattle in this region. And why are they raising cattle here? Well, because England is an island and they can't take care and feed all of the people that they need back home. So they see this beautiful fat piece of land called Australia, and they settle it, and they move and graze their sheep, their wools, their cows, whatever it is that they're growing, and then send the hides and the meat back to hungry England. People are fed, and they're making the globe just a little bit smaller. It's more like isn't it a small world after all kind of thing. And it's getting closer and closer to that. So that ends this particular idea of market revolution. Now I want to look at, well, what about the rest of the world? How did the rest, I mean, England's, fat, they're happy, but what about the rest of the world? How are they reacting? How are they taking to this explosion of the markets? Are they just sitting by? Are they jumping on board and saying, hey, let me be a part of this? Or are they pushing back and saying, no, I don't want this? That's where we're going next with New Global Situations, Part 1.